That was quite a month for cloud computing, now wasn't it? But if you think you've seen everything, hang on because it's about to get a whole lot worse. Welcome back to Adventures in Data and Finance, where we look at the intersection of data and financial issues as it affects your business in the modern world. And today we have a very special guest. We have TableauTim. TableauTim is a very popular YouTube channel, talks about Tableau software and some of the broader topics as well around data and also how it intersects with our world of accounting and finance as well. And so, Tim, want to welcome you, especially because I know you're in the UK. This is a later call for you, and really appreciate
Yeah.
having you here today.
No worries, absolute pleasure. I was saying to you just before we started the recording that I've worked in finance pretty much for the last 5 or 6 years in different sort of industries as well. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and it was really grateful you reached out to kind of get me to come and chat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, thanks again for being here. So I guess I'll kind of jump into things here today. We've had quite a crazy October as far as things related to data
Right.
as far as data is going. Obviously we had the AWS outage here in the States last week, and then there
Yeah.
was another outage on Tuesday as well.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of, I think, in 2025, a lot of disruption in the industry as well, and how
Yeah.
organizations are using their information and leveraging that. I personally have been using tools like Tableau for well over a decade now, and
Right.
I remember, I'm sure you have a similar experience where, when if we go back, say to 2010, 2015, there was a lot of eagerness, a lot of
Yeah.
excitement around what data could do, and how it can make our lives easier, and
Yeah.
also just that we could leverage it. And so today, I think we're kind of having, those growing pains, that adolescent stage of the
Yeah.
data and analytics
Yeah.
space. So would you agree that that's a fair thing to say these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a couple of really interesting transitions over the years. My first version of Tableau was version 7, like a really long time ago. And what has been incredible to see, and it's actually lasted like a really long time, is the momentum in the space has been relentless, to the point where there are products today that I use on a daily basis in the analytics space that did not exist as even a company just 5 years ago. Right. And it's only a fraction of this time frame, like just under half of this time frame. So what that shows to me is that not only is change something that we have to get used to, but the demand and the need for better tooling is also picking up. And a combination of all of these factors is making the space, I think, a really challenging one for vendors, but actually a really challenging one for analysts who are using these tools to sort of keep up. And so one of the things I try and do is to help people keep up with that change, at least in the small niche that I know, which is Tableau. But even then, the final change I've noticed is that a lot of the tools, the things we used to use, have now become brands. So Tableau used to be a tool, desktop, server, cloud. Now it's a brand that has been sort of capitalized on by Tableau. When you think of Tableau next, the Tableau naming there is purely for brand purposes. The ecosystem itself is a completely new one. So yeah, we've seen massive evolution. And I think, yeah, all of that sort of summarizes many of the challenges we'll probably touch on today. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was actually my first version was version 7 as well. So it was a very special version. I remember.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, so that's great.
Yeah.
So, you said, and quite rightly, that, there's been a lot of changes for us as consumers using tools
Mhm.
like Tableau is no longer just a tool. It's now a whole brand. And I remember that they were really fighting to kind of make that change back about maybe, you know, 10 to 5 years ago, especially when
Mhm.
Salesforce bought them.
Yeah.
But there's also been a lot of changes for the vendors themselves, and I
Correct.
want to address the video that you put out there recently, where you
Yeah.
talk about how your dashboard's going to cost a lot more now. This idea of how we're paying for these tools and how vendors are charging for them has gone through a lot of changes, and again, a lot of
Correct.
growth
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
So maybe can you just kind of give us a breakdown to someone who's maybe
Yeah.
heard about Tableau, Power BI, Snowflake, Alteryx, all these tools, that these are great, and they are great tools. I think we'll all agree
Hmm.
they're wonderful, instruments for us to use to get our work done.
Yeah.
But how does that generally work right now as far as the costing? If someone's looking to get into using these tools, what does that look like? Is it like an Office
Yeah.
365 subscription? Is it just kind of
Hmm.
going out and buying a license? What's that looking like these days?
Yeah. So when we agreed to sort of chat on this podcast, I actually thought a bit more about this topic, and I think one thing I missed in my video was actually a broader shift in technology. And this broader shift really goes back to the rise of companies like AWS, essentially cloud resourced solutions. And so large companies tend to consider themselves large once another company has launched on their platform. So if you think of AWS, many companies that we know and love today, Formula One, banks like Monzo here in the UK, they all run on AWS. They've been able to launch entire businesses in other verticals on the platform. But one of the side effects of that model is that you basically pay for the resources as you consume them. So AWS themselves run a fairly sort of tightly knit consumption model where you either pay for the resources you need on the spot, they call it spot pricing, or you pay for a certain amount of capacity, and it changes based on the price, the thresholds that you hit. And then there are other resources which are sort of transactional. So they have this serverless capability where you basically get charged per API call that you make, but you don't pay for the resources that run those API calls. And so that's a very different sort of type of model. And so the businesses that have built on top of this ecosystem have had to think about the way they run their platforms differently. And one of those aspects is obviously costs, because they just get one big AWS bill at the end of the year. And actually the marginal cost to add a customer onto their solution typically isn't that much. So when they've thought of pricing, they've typically gone down the tiering structure, which is here's a starter tier, like a free tier, here's a premium tier, and here's the enterprise tier. And that's typically been sort of the 3-tier solution. And if we link this back to Tableau and Power BI, actually that was very much a similar model they used to run, but they were fundamentally doing something different. They were shipping software. They were actually shipping code onto your laptop and shipping software onto your servers. And so they used to price the technology, their software, on a performance basis. So there used to be this idea of a core Tableau server license, and a core was essentially literally the processing core that was actually on the machine. So if you wanted your Tableau server to use, let's say, 12 cores, you needed to pay a certain price to unlock the full 12 cores, and then you went off to your IT team, they got you a 12-core server, and now you had a pretty capable Tableau server. Over on desktop, you were paying per seat, so you were literally paying for each copy of the software that was being shipped. The problem is, as companies have grown and as they've become more and more like SaaS solutions, that solution doesn't really stand up, because the cost of development sort of exceeds the cost of the software you're actually shipping, and the cost of maintaining that. And so what they've started to think is, hey, we need to change our model to have the prices that customers pay match not only the value that we think they get out of our product, but also the actual costs of running that platform. So then companies like Snowflake turned up, and Snowflake really sort of turned that model on its head and said, hey, we've built our entire business on AWS, but actually we're going to put a completely different model back to the customer. We're going to charge them on consumption. And consumption is a really interesting one, because it allowed Snowflake to really play that as an advantage versus the traditional database. If you take a database, you stand it up internally and it's always running. And so what that means is the cost to maintain it and run it is essentially a flat line. The thing is, when it's quiet, you're still paying that high cost to run a fairly quiet database. But when it's really, really busy, sometimes that database, that flat line, doesn't go up and down to match demand spikes. So you could have, let's say, a Black Friday, and your database isn't able to handle the masses of transactions that are coming in. And so internal enterprise teams have had to do a lot of very creative sort of technical solutions, or just have these massive servers waiting for these like one-off solutions throughout the year. So Snowflake comes in and says, hey, we can do consumption pricing and on-demand pricing for those kinds of resources. And yeah, Snowflake literally ramps up and down depending on that usage. And that's been a great sort of capability for lots of companies. Then they came in and bundled sharing, and they came in and bundled AI workloads. then consumption pricing really set in. And now that has creeped into the rest of the analytics ecosystem. So now you've gone from shipping software to shipping a cloud solution and having tiers, premium, enterprise, and like give me a call sort of tiers. And now we've gone full circle all the way to consumption, where we're pushing that model even further out and saying, hey, we're actually not going to charge you to actually get access into the platform. There's maybe a basic sort of, let's say, cost to participate in the ecosystem. But then additionally, we're going to add this component which looks at the consumption. So in the Tableau sense, back in the day, you used to pay for software. You could set an unlimited number of queries to your database. They didn't care. And when you went to cloud solutions, they introduced limits with Tableau Cloud. So you had to be on the really top tier to be able to have higher levels of limits. But there wasn't really something stopping you from sending more and more queries. It was just, basically use it reasonably. But with Tableau Cloud, they've completely sort of taken the restraints off. There is no concept of an extract in Tableau Next. Everything is querying live. And as a result of that, they've put on a pricing model that looks at consumption. So I call it the cost per query in my video, because that's really fundamentally what it is. Every time you're firing a query to a live database, either Snowflake or Tableau Next or Data Cloud, is going to be evaluating some element of cost as it relates to the effort required to generate that query. And if you work your way back through your entire analytics stack, you'll find that there are different places where that cost can be very high depending on the demand, the type of query, the number of records, and then essentially the computation you're trying to do on top of those results that are coming back. And that's where this sort of starts to become interesting, because we've never really had to think about that in analytics. We've never really had to plan ahead to think, hey, what is the query that this workbook is going to do to the finance team when they get the bill at the end of the month? And the thing that makes that more complex is that analytics solutions are sort of multi-layered solutions. They're not just one technology, they're many technologies. So you've got Snowflake or Databricks, you've got maybe Alteryx in the middle doing something, you might have Tableau or Power BI, whatever tools you're using. DBT as a semantic modeling layer, you might have a metadata store as well in there, you might have some enterprise sort of authentication and identity systems. All of these things come together to form a platform within your organization. And so when you log on and you access a report and you send a query and you get a response back, you are touching all of these. And with all of them, you might be, paying a small price per transaction, as it were. And so it becomes really hard to put a pin on this answer that I just got. It's really value for me to make decisions, but is it generating enough value to match the cost that it's now costing to send that query and come back? And if you aggregate that up to a sales force of 1,000 people, or a finance team of, let's say, 20 people who have to be doing sort of all of these tasks, maybe on a monthly or quarterly basis, it starts to add up, and you start to ask really hard questions about, hey, is this dashboard going to be worth maybe $3,000 a year? It might not be, but for some teams, it might absolutely be. And so that's a very sort of long history. I've just rambled for like 2 minutes, but hopefully you get the idea, and maybe we can dig a bit deeper into some of the concepts.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I appreciate that you're kind of giving us a very full picture here, and recommend to anyone who's listening to this as well, just go back as well and listen to what Tim said. Maybe as we get into some of the more probing questions here in a minute,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I think you've laid it out really well, just how much things have changed, especially for the tech sector, right? Because that's
Yeah.
really what's driving this here, and I like what you said that. From their perspective. And I remember when Tableau moved from a seat license model where you paid, I think it was like what, $800 US, or
Yeah.
the server was
Yeah.
300,000 for the core
Yeah.
license. And then all of a sudden they actually went back to their customers and said, "Oh, we're going to do subscription now." And I
Yeah.
was in an organization at the time, and it took, I think, at least a couple of years for them to negotiate some kind of deal. I wasn't
Yeah.
privy to what happened in the end, but they
Yeah.
had to come up with some kind of arrangement,
Yeah.
because a lot of companies had already heavily invested in saying, here's our product, here's the
Yeah.
product we want. We're going to pay this one-time fee. We'll pay the maintenance, sure, but
Yeah.
after that, instead
Yeah.
of saying we're going to pay, up the maintenance charge, Tableau came back instead and said we're going to just move to a subscription license as well, and now we're
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
the query level. But let me start off, I guess, with the obvious question here, Tim. If I'm
Hmm.
a consumer, and this could be,
Yeah.
and like Tableau started out as a blogging feature tool, which is ironic because I was actually working on trying to put a Tableau Viz into my blog earlier this morning, and it's not working. But it really started out in the academic world
It
because
did. Yeah,
the it was an academic professor who actually came up with
yeah,
the whole program over in Washington State.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
you
Solaris, it
know,
was called. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, and
yeah,
so, the average consumer, whether it's an individual, maybe a small business owner, or even a large organization, a large enterprise, is looking at this now and going, "Well, hold on a minute. How come, let's say back in 2018, I could pay for a license, or maybe 2022, I'm paying
yeah,
for a subscription,
yeah,
and that covered, like, yes, I'm having to pay for the server costs on my back end, or something like that to make this work, or paying for the laptop electricity. But
yeah,
now all of a sudden you're forcing me to pay by the query.
yeah.
How
Exactly.
how
What's
is there
changed? Yeah. What,
yeah, is what changed, and
what
is
happened?
there a defense for these companies, to the question of, how is this fair? I guess is the
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a fantastic question. And you know what? Sometimes I've come up with some great responses that I think, Salesforce or Tableau should be using, but that's not the argument they use. And it's sort of the irony. So let me play back what I think is the best answer to that. If I was Salesforce and you'd ask me that question, this is the answer I'd play back, and it's simply this. Listen, um, 10 years ago, we had Tableau Public, we had Tableau Desktop. And really what you were paying for was access to great software. And for that price, you got the full capability, but you also got things like Tableau Public for free, which you could go and dabble in, but you couldn't use Tableau Public to do anything serious. And so you did have to actually pay to get involved in the ecosystem from a professional standpoint. If we fast forward today, and this is the alarming thing, I don't know why they don't say this more often. For that academic who was just trying to create something on a blog, you can do that entirely for free today. Tableau Public Desktop Edition is the full desktop software, entirely free, no restrictions. You can save locally on your laptop, no connection to Tableau Public required at all. Even the download itself, you don't need to sign up. So if I say that again, you can use the full capability of Tableau Desktop without paying anything, without signing up for anything, locally on your machine, connected to a flat file anytime you want. Where the pricing comes in is if you want to then start connecting to enterprise data sources, so a database, for example, or something like an API or something a little bit more advanced. Those are where they start to pay for the value of the platform. And so what Salesforce have really done is they've priced the power of the platform, the ecosystem, Tableau Cloud, Tableau Server, and then they've coupled the creator, viewer, and explorer to the platform rather than just, treating desktop and server as separate things. And so they've basically brought the desktop product into the ecosystem, the platform, and now they've priced that as a bundle, which makes sense from their perspective. But they've left that, I would call it like carrot, like free for everyone to consume, but they don't talk about it because they don't want you to know about it. But it's right there and it's accessible. So that to me would be the best argument that I would give, because to me it balances out for everyone else, academics, students, anyone even at work who just wants to build a solution quickly and test, hey, does this work? Go to your database, export it as a CSV, drop it into Tableau Public Desktop Edition, build a solution on your desktop, run it on your desktop, and if someone likes it, guess what? You just basically switch out the connection to the database when you buy the product. It's that simple. No rework done. But then here's the thing. For everyone else, the world hasn't changed. They still want to connect to a database. They still want to connect to all of these things. And they didn't ask for AI capabilities. They didn't ask for the subscription pricing. They were quite happy to sit on basically old software for a really, really long time without anything changing. I think the problem then comes where a company like Salesforce, who really has what I would call a SaaS first interaction with their customer, their entire revenue model is predicated on having that repeat business. They call it annual recurring revenue, ARR. And this is where like tech and let's say, the tech sector in general has become super competitive, because for companies like Salesforce, that number at the end of the year needs to keep going up. And that has basically trickled all the way down into their products to the point where they design the products to meet this objective, when that objective has nothing to do with the core activity of analytics. You can build great analytics solutions without having to have them have a subscription component that contributes to this, concept of annual recurring revenue. And so that's essentially sort of the sinister response to that question, which is, if I'm Salesforce, I'm trying to respond to this, and I'm just being real with you. I'm saying, well, I have a duty to my investors to increase ARR. I can't do that if I ship you something once and you never come back to me. And so that to me, that's genuinely a simple answer to that problem. If Tableau wasn't owned by Salesforce, would it have done all of this? I don't think it would have done. It would have kept some parts of its platform exactly the same as it was. But I kind of feel like the move to the cloud was a little bit of a grooming step to get it ready for someone like Salesforce to acquire it, because maybe I think Tableau felt that was the only way that kind of size company was going to survive. And there's dynamics in that question as well. But
Yeah,
there's
and
sort of my positive
yeah.
answer and like my spun answer.
Yeah, no, for sure, and I know that not everyone is maybe familiar with this because now this is starting to become a little bit ancient history in
Yeah,
technical
yeah,
terms. But Tableau
yeah.
had really painted themselves into a corner, with their
Correct,
pricing, right? Where they had
correct.
pricing really of a startup, but once they started to go big, they kept that pricing while adding all
And
these
it didn't
enterprise
work.
features. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it was great going up against Power BI, but you know, um, Power BI and Microsoft have something called Azure as their moat, and so Power BI doesn't need to make boatloads of money because it keeps you in the Azure platform, which makes Microsoft a boatload of money. Tableau was a standalone, let's say, player in this industry. It's very much similar to how Fivetran and DBT have come together. I see that as a very similar relationship. Two companies. I'm very sinister with Fivetran and DBT. Are you familiar with both of those tools, or should I maybe just explain what they are very briefly?
yeah, maybe just gonna give an
Yeah,
introduction to
yeah,
the
for
audience
everyone's
as well.
benefits.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So DBT is a tool that allows you to build semantic models on top of your warehouse. So you get DBT, you put it on top of Snowflake or Databricks, whatever your database is, and essentially allows you to treat transformations and ETL, ELT operations as code. And so it creates a really sort of structured way to bring CI/CD principles to that sort of type of process. So rather than something like Alteryx, to visually clean your data, you have a DBT process that can run specific operations for you in an automatic way with testing built in. And if there's a problem, it can sort of report that back in a very sort of powerful way. Fivetran is a connection tool that connects to very modern data sources. So if I want to connect YouTube to my Snowflake database, what I do is I go to Fivetran and it sets up a DBT instruction with an API call to YouTube. So Fivetran has the API call to YouTube, it gets the data, processes it, and then it turns it into a DBT instruction that writes it into Snowflake. So there's a symbiosis between Fivetran and DBT, so they kind of feed each other. But I've always criticized both of those companies because I feel like semantic modeling is a feature of a platform, not a product. And good connectors to many of the sort of marketing and digital data sources is also a feature, not a platform. And so I kind of see Fivetran and DBT coming together as kind of another way of solving the problem that Tableau had as a standout, as a startup, coming together with Salesforce. Having a really big partner that can sort of back up the books in a way, but then also the thing that no one ever really discussed much with the Salesforce Tableau acquisition is that when Salesforce spent as much money as they did, that investment was going to need to pay back, and the only way it does that is by bringing Tableau to the Salesforce customer in a way that the Salesforce customer understands. And Tableau Desktop is not that. If you've ever worked with Salesforce and Tableau, you'll know it's painful. It's not an
Oh
easy
yeah.
thing to do. And so that in itself was never going to work. And so they did need to re-architect Salesforce, and they did need to re-architect Tableau in a combined way. And that is essentially what Tableau Next is. But while they were doing that, they found a really good way to keep the ARR running nicely. And that's where this cost per query kind of element comes in, which is ironic because Desktop and Tableau have this concept of extracts like all over the place to do the exact opposite, to save you sending queries back to your database. Somehow all the platforms have forgotten what caching is, and they've just binned it for this what I think this sort of really strange benefit. And there are good reasons to connect live to a database in some scenarios, but not. I rarely come across many use cases that genuinely need a live data source.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Well, and I was going to say, in my years using Tableau, I was not only building stuff, I was helping people to build stuff. It's
Yeah,
kind of what I've been doing for, well, a good while now. And,
yeah,
as you said, like, I think I could, there was one case I had where literally the guy was inspired by these Wall Street movies where, like, they got the
right,
screens up there, and he went out
yeah,
to Best Buy, bought a bunch of TVs while I was off on vacation, and came back and it's like, okay, so now you can use Tableau to do these like refresh live reports and all that, right? It's like, oh, and I
yeah,
got it working with a little bit of JavaScript, but
yeah,
this was back in the
yeah,
version 7 days.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
you're right that like for most users, not only is the extract model still more efficient and more in line with what their needs and goals are, but
yeah,
one of the other things, like going to what you're saying about where Tableau is today versus where it came from and what the tool is, Tableau has all these really neat bonus features they don't really even sell and never really ever sold.
yeah,
And one of
yeah,
them was the extract format itself. They use what is called a
yeah,
columnar data structure,
yeah, yeah,
and basically,
yeah,
I saw it in real time where like there'd be these humongous files that I was, when I was working with teams that were really struggling with kind of taking massive sets of data
data volume.
down.
Yeah,
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 like it
yeah,
would actually it would crunch it. I'm not going to say, by the way, just as a caveat here to anyone who's attempting this, don't use Tableau as a data cruncher. You'll get yourself in trouble. But it does actually end up doing that along the way. It has a
yeah,
it
yeah,
has a
yeah,
capacity to outdo WinZip, for example, if you're
yeah,
thinking in those terms, right? But
yeah, yeah,
this all goes back to, again, that it doesn't sound like what you're saying is that this is a change that was for the benefit of the consumer,
no,
right?
no,
It was purely because on Salesforce's side, and this is true of the entire tech sector, and I will add also financial services, as kind of moved in this
hmm,
direction as well.
yeah,
They have to grow their revenue, they have to grow their stock price if they're publicly traded,
yeah,
and on the flip side, and I think you touched on this. I was hearing murmurings about this back in the summer. There was these horror stories of companies getting the snowflake bill at the end of the month, and it
yeah,
jumps up by like $1 million out of the blue, and the CFO's
yeah,
freaking out. So we have this kind of we have this détente right now, which is that
yeah,
on the one hand, the software companies are like, we have to grow our revenue. And on the
yeah,
other side, you have a lot of businesses, and I'm sure Salesforce is no different in their expense side of things, where they're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
we want nice, stable, even expenses, preferably flat or even decreasing.
yeah,
But
yeah,
if it's going to grow, at least it grows in a linear fashion, right? It's not
correct.
going to grow,
Yeah,
with volatility. So I guess, Tim, here's a question: is who's going to win out on this at the end of the day? Is this going to be something where the consumer, which in this case is going to be a lot of enterprises,
hmm,
are going to say, well, if that's the way you're going to be, we're going to take our ball and go home?
yeah,
Or is this going to be something where the software companies are going to basically establish themselves as the only game in town, right? Not quite a
yeah,
cartel, but let's face it, it takes a lot to get these platforms up and running,
yeah.
and so who's going to win out at the end of the day? Do you think, with the way that we're going here with this pricing model? Before we get back to Tim's answer, let's take a moment to talk about your data. As October has shown, the world is a scary place, even in the cloud. If you're concerned with what's been happening and with what Tim's been revealing about cloud revenue, we understand. At Palmetto Maple, not only do we understand data, but we also get how it affects your bottom line. Our team's data and governance knowledge is perfectly matched with decades of financial experience to help you turn those ones and zeros into dollar signs. So reach out today if you need help implementing a data solution which works for your business and not the other way around. Now, back to Tim's answer.
Yeah, I there's lots of interesting answers here. So there's one massive curveball that I think hasn't really shown its face in full force. And I might sound like I'm on some AI hype train for a second here, but the MCP capabilities, Model Context Protocol, for anyone listening, MCP is you can think of it as an API that allows a LLM to interface your application. So if I take Tableau has data sources, it has metadata about your data sources, it has visualizations, it has pulse metrics. Tableau's MCP allows an LLM to understand the architecture of those assets. And then consequently, it gives you a word interface, literally a text box interface, to allow you to query those things very easily. Now, before MCPs, what you had to do the exact same thing was become a developer. You had to know how to use the APIs, like 7 different APIs, to build an application that would do the same thing. And even then, it wasn't flexible because each of the APIs had different ways of authenticating. They had different ways of working together. MCP essentially creates one connection point to multiple API points. And so what it starts to open up the possibility for is for organizations to essentially build their own analytics stack, because that MCP becomes the interface, not just for controlling the Tableau platform, but also extracting and data and information from the platform without you having to move it off. So one of the hardest things that these platforms do is they lock you in, but suddenly AI needs hooks into all of these wonderful rich data sources, and they don't want to fall behind with this. So what they've done is they've created, like a massive open door in their walled gardens. And so one of the reasons you won't see like incredibly fast adoption of MCPs is because they want to have that relationship with you as a customer. You see, the problem with an MCP is if you can extract data from the platform without ever hearing Salesforce or Tableau, you've lost the relationship with the customer. So when that invoice comes in, you're just caring about what your invoice is to Claude or OpenAI, but you completely forget that actually Tableau or whatever is pushing this data into your LLM. And it's very easy for those platforms to build like an AI sort of header on top of your real world, and then suddenly you've just been usurped by an LLM. So this is a curveball. Now, the other component to this is that I think if you look at really advanced analytics teams, they don't tend to use these big incumbent platforms to run the core of their analytics infrastructure. They actually tend to run their core analytics infrastructure mostly as code. So using things like dbt, using things like visualization libraries like D3, and to put themselves in a place where their core platform, the things that people need every single day, don't actually run on these platform heavy solutions. Instead, they leave those to prototyping, emerging solution, business subunits. And so they keep the cost of these platforms from spiraling out of control. And anything that looks like it's about to get expensive, they bring into their internal infrastructure, they standardize it, they put an analytics team behind it, and then they push it. The problem is not every company has the skill set to do that, and not every company has, I think, the money and the backing to be able to push that through. You tend to see things like Netflix has this, Spotify has this, Google have this. But if I go to my not-for-profit down the road with only 10 people, they don't have this. They're going to be buying software off the shelf. So I think there's going to be this emergence or this rush back to owning the entire analytical stack and only using components from the platforms that you actually want to use. And I think that will be a push and pull. But we've started to see this a little bit with AWS, where we've seen some really large companies, including Amazon themselves, moving off the cloud because they're finding it more expensive, sometimes more costly to actually maintain than the cloud solution. So I think the winner will ultimately always be the customer. The customer never wants to be in a position where they can't control their destiny. And I still think we're at the place where the customer holds a lot of chips in this discussion, because AI has really destabilized the conversation around, like, who is the customer engaging with? Are they engaging with the LLM? Are they engaging with the vendor? Or are they engaging with their own customers who have a different expectation on what the world should look like? And so it's sort of a cop-out answer. I'm not really giving you like a specific thing, but I think it's going to be an interesting tug of war. And I think, in-house bespoke solutions will ultimately win out over these platforms, because they'll just keep pushing for more revenue, and there does come a point where it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and to that point, like, some of these things are just at the end of the day very much,
Yeah.
fad oriented. And if you don't believe me, watch how fast this can change, faster than you can say Hadoop.
Yeah. Yeah.
Things do change really rapidly, even
Yeah.
in the tech
Yeah.
space.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think you're right. That at the end of the day, like the tech sector, I think has always had this kind of love hate relationship with, kind of opening doors, to use your
True.
term. And I think
Yeah.
that's a good term because yeah, that's their bread and butter. It's like, why are you buying their software,
Yeah.
buying into their
Yeah.
platform otherwise if they're
Yeah.
not going to make your life easier and allow you to have more control? But then they kind of get into this habit. And of all silly things, I'll say even you see this actually in the video game space. If we go back over the decades, where like
Yeah.
I won't name names, but there's certain companies that will come out with like a new platform, and they will like, so it's great. We're gonna basically own all your games now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then everyone's like, no, you're not, and that actually is a good tell of
Yeah.
where the enterprise software space is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's really interesting to hear because I hadn't considered that. I mean, I knew that the AI and the LLM components were there for Tableau for sure,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, I think the other phrase that comes to mind too is what they use in the markets, which is the market can stay stupid longer than you can stay solvent. Uh,
Yes.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised myself. I don't know what kind of standards you guys have in the UK, although I know you have a very robust data privacy standard
Yeah. Yeah.
infrastructure that goes back a few years. But here in the states, there's a lot of companies that just kind of went along with the cloud, and the national standards that came out basically saying NIS as what they call them, where it's like, well, if it's on the cloud and it has this, and there's an extra site somewhere down the road, then you're fine. And that works all
Yeah.
the way up until again last Monday when you find out that your backup Amazon server is literally down the street in the next block over, and there's a power outage and the whole thing goes. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think there's been
Yeah.
a lot of blind faith, in
Yes.
this.
Yes. Yes. And you only find out when these things fall apart. And one of the things I'm constantly amazed by is the other side of this, which is the burst in other platforms. And by this I'm talking about other tools trying to nip at the feet of the Tableaus and Power BIs and the incumbents, as it were. So just literally the other day, I think I counted 7 other BI analytics platforms that target Tableau and or Power BI if you search for them on Google. And they're actually all very good. Like, these are not companies that I would have paid attention to 5 years ago, but it's become easy and very sort of it's become very easy for companies to essentially start up and challenge the challenges in terms of their philosophy of how they build a platform. So one that's very big in my head, because I see it a lot of work, is Sigma Analytics. Very simple tool. The philosophical difference I tell people about Sigma is that it's a BI tool that's built for the spreadsheet lover, basically. So if you really love spreadsheets, you're going to love Sigma over Tableau, because its underlying philosophy is that you start from the most granular level and you build up to your visualization. Tableau is very aggregative. It likes to start at the very top with the aggregate and then let you drill down into your data. So that's sort of Sigma's take. If you take Hex, that is a platform that's geared towards the data science, the data engineer. They can go in and code what they want and build their ideal solution, package it all up, and then deliver it as a solution to their customer. If you go to Count or Observable or Omni, like, the list is just so long now, and they all have really good takes on how to do things differently. And so it's also getting competitive. It's genuinely competitive. And that keeps the big players honest, and it keeps the prices, I think, very healthy. And I think that's the other component here, that if any one of the big people make a mistake, it's very easy for one of these incumbents I'm mentioning, one of these new challenges I'm mentioning, to step up and go to the customer and say, hey, you spent 7 figures on Tableau last year. We have a solution that will halve that cost, and it will do exactly the same thing. And by the way, thanks to all the Tableau APIs and MCPs, we've got a migration tool that can do that in a week.
Yeah,
And then suddenly you're talking, right?
yeah, and it's funny because again, 20 years ago, that was Tableau, right? They were the
Yes,
disruptor
exactly.
that
Yeah,
came
yeah,
in
yeah,
a
yeah,
much needed way.
yeah,
And again, you go and and I do recommend people, if you haven't tried Tableau, just go, as you said, it's free to download, right?
yeah, yeah,
And go
yeah.
try, go see all the connections that this thing has. They just, I
Yeah.
know every year they were just announcing, oh,
Hundreds.
now
Yeah,
we've connected it to toasters, all right? It's
yeah,
like, and so
yeah. It's
it's really
prolific,
well
isn't it?
designed.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, but at the same point, I'm going to ask a question here. Based on what you're saying, with all these, like, challengers coming up, and I actually just saw the latest Gartner chart. I don't know how old it is now, but just came across it the other day.
yeah,
Tableau and Power BI are there in that top right corner. They're the leaders, right? Click's still
yeah.
there, kind of floating around. But um, are we heading for a future, in your opinion, Tim, where we're going to see the what I'll call the Adobification of BI,
Hmm.
where, if you look at Adobe, what they had, and they did very well by it. They ended up buying a whole bunch of other software along the way to kind of
Yeah,
grow out their own
yeah,
ecosystem. But
yeah,
they were PDFs back in the day.
yeah,
Like, you could
yeah,
not create a PDF without
yeah.
their
That
tool.
was their moat. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and that was their but then it fell, right? People
yeah.
found a way of, like, basically decrypting these files. Tableau, as I said, it's an open secret that they're basically XML files, right?
Yep.
They're not really hard to, like, they're not even encrypted really, right? You just change the
Hmm.
extension on the file and then away you go. Is Tableau in particular heading for a future where someone's going to say, "Hey, you're paying, as you said, six figures, seven figures, even for your Tableau server environment. You may not want all the stuff, like you said earlier, that is on there.
Yeah.
We can
Hmm.
host your solution, host your Tableau workbooks on a separate site, and you don't have to pay for all this stuff you don't want."
Yeah, yeah. I think it's even more existential than that because hardware and technology has moved on really, really fast. So today it's really easy for someone to build an inefficient solution. It will still run well on a capable laptop, right? So you look at Hyper, which was the technology that basically became the modern day extract, but Hyper was a technology they bought from a university. It was actually database technology that they bought from a university, but it never launched as a database, primarily because they would have lost partners, and also a lot of IT CIOs, CTOs did not want Tableau to become a tool where you could store data. That's sort of like a, Tableau was very good at land and expand, getting into places it should never had a right to be in. But then if you turn that into a database, every IT manager would have just sort of brought the drawbridge down. So that's why that never sort of happened there. But um, I do think it's easier today for someone to build a compelling tool and put it in front of a customer and get them to try it, because all of that has moved to the browser. There's no more installation to be done these days. Literally every single one of those analytics tools I mentioned, there is no software to install. They're all in the browser. So because they're in the browser, anyone can try them today. You can literally send an email to someone in the finance team and say, "Hey, I have this great new tool. It's basically spreadsheets for finance people." And actually, there's a tool that actually markets this exact way, and they'll sign up, they'll try it, and boom, you've got them. You've got someone who's interested in the thing, and then it's much easier for them to figure out, now, how do we sell this into that business, into that team as a starting point, then into a wider org, and then before you know it, they're talking to IT saying, "Hey, we've got 100 users in your company using our tool. You should really just standardize this and make it an enterprise tool." And at that point, the conversation is quite simple for that company. So those are the dynamics. We've really moved away from shipping software, as I said at the start, and um, it, the reason I worry a lot about Tableau Next is because it's very easy. It makes it very easy for a Tableau customer to look at the ecosystem and see that, oh, this no longer represents what I want from Tableau, and it makes it very easy for them to look elsewhere without understanding that Tableau Next isn't supposed to be for them. It's supposed to be for the Salesforce customer. But Salesforce don't delineate that message. They just go really hard at the whole entire Tableau community with that one message that Salesforce is everything, and it pushes people away. And I hear people all the time saying, I don't want to pay another penny to Salesforce. It's literally the first thing that comes out of most people's phrase, because they know that it's in there and it's prolific and it's, it's captured some part of their Salesforce and they don't want it to spread elsewhere. And so that's always been my biggest worry with Tableau Next. It takes years to build up a reputation. I think the saying is you build up reputation in small drips, but you lose trust in buckets, right? And that's really kind of what I fear the most. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I know we're almost at time here. I wanted to end off with
Yeah.
two questions, and I want to get your take on it. And it's for two specific kinds of audiences, right?
Yeah.
And the first one is going to be if you're the CXO, the business owner who either has an internal team or is maybe working with a consultant and
Yeah.
trying to kind of get kind of things in order in your ecosystem, right?
Yeah.
Using Tableau or Snowflake, any of these tools right now.
Yeah.
What is the thing that individual, that business leader needs to understand about what their technical staff, their business intelligence analytics staff is going through right now? That you need to that you really need they want you
Yeah.
to know so that they can address it and that they're empowered to address it in the next year. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So, obviously I make a ton of content as TableauTim, but by day I'm an analytics consultant, and I actually tackle this question pretty much all the time when we're working with new clients. And I'll be just really honest and blunt here, and I'll say this: so often, so often, teams don't realize that they're not extracting the most value out of the tools they have, right? So by that I mean, they know, like, as a simple example, they might have Tableau, they might have Power BI, but they've not really gone in and looked at the whole ecosystem that they have access to and looked at every corner and say, how can I extract value for my business by adopting all of this ecosystem? Because so often, just by doing that, you open up solutions to problems your business is facing, but you didn't know that those technical solutions sit in the platform. I see this all the time with Tableau. A really simple one: virtual connections, right? So many companies have Tableau Cloud. And if you've been sold Tableau Cloud in the last, let's say, 2 or 3 years, I'm 100% confident you have something called the data management add-on, because it was almost impossible to get it off your invoice. If you have the data management add-on, you have something called a virtual connection. Now, a virtual connection allows you to create a data connection that can be shared across anyone in your organization. This creates one connection, one point of failure, and one thing for IT to manage, but it can touch any number of workbooks, any number of assets. And so if you want to change the connection to a data, that alone would solve so many data problems in many companies, because everyone starts with the workbook and goes and builds their own version of the data source and then goes and build their own version of the calculation. And this sort of just compounds. And before you know it, 3 years later, 50 people have built a profit, calculation, and they're not doing it all in the same way. And so it's really, really important. Like, make sure your team is extracting all the possible value out of the tools they have. Then the second thing I would say is, once you figure that out, decompose your ecosystem, decompose your platform, and really ask yourself, where is the real problem? So often you're solving the problem at the point it presents itself. That's sort of the front door of the problem. But actually, with any house, you've got to open the front door, go in and find the room that has the damp or the room that has the leak. And that problem actually might not be how it presents itself to the end user or to the rest of the business. And really try and unpick how to solve that problem. Because again, so often we see solutions that paper over the cracks, and then they become even bigger problems down the road because they've hidden the true sort of source of the issue. And so you get these sort of black box solutions where this thing runs every day, no one really knows how it runs, but we don't touch it, we don't change it, And 3 years down the line, the vendor says, "Hey, we're deprecating this," and everyone just groans really loudly because they're like, "Oh no, we're now going to have to unpick this thing we've not wanted to touch for 5 years," and it becomes painful. And then you end up building a new solution from scratch because you didn't pay attention to what was actually going on. Like, it would have been easier to do that than it would have been to now try and build something blind. So those are the two things I would say. Everything else, yes, you can always go and get new tools to try and solve problems, but you're still going to have people problems. You're still going to have adoption problems. You're still going to have challenges building a community of really capable users around those tools. So why go through all that pain when you can do that with what you have and extract more value without spending a single penny on more software? That's genuinely my sort of biggest advice. Of course,
Yeah.
people will say I'm a consultant, so of course I'm going to say that, but no, it's genuinely true. Like, it's
No,
how I make a living, right? And it works. Yeah,
yeah, and I'll add this as well because we do consulting as well here,
yeah, yeah,
on our side, and
yeah,
yeah, we could get a lot of money. We'd be happy to help out anyone. I'm sure we'll have
yeah,
your shout out at the end here as well, Tim, because we want to
yeah,
kind of promote your business there as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
But let me just be real with all the business leaders that are hearing this. Um, there are like Tim said, there are so many times I've seen where companies waste money on software. And what I mean by that is,
yeah,
again, so you go out and buy these solutions, even when it was still local and installed on your laptops.
yeah, yeah,
And people like Tableau is a great example. Tableau has I'm sure they have this thing, the 80/20 rule. 80% of the
yeah,
time,
yeah,
comes from 20% of the thing. Here it is. Tableau is a glorified spreadsheet generator for most
yeah,
organizations and most teams, and it has been that way
yeah,
for almost 20 years now because a
yeah,
lot of organizations haven't gone out of their way to say, let's, like Tim said, let's look at all the capabilities of this tool, right? And even the desktop tool is a
yeah,
fantastic tool that will be light years ahead of what you're doing in Excel,
yeah,
and for a lot of the stuff you're doing, a lot of your analysis. But here's the thing, it's not just about spending money, right? Either on software or
mhm,
consultants, right? And again, I'm happy to just help, in our organization get on this track, right?
yeah,
But the most successful implementations I've seen is where I've seen managers, I've had the privilege of working under some of them,
yeah,
who have basically said, okay, I know you got a lot going on, but once per month or once per week, depending on how things work, your job is to basically sit down and go explore some of the stuff, right? I want
yeah,
you to, like, because
yeah.
don't ask people to do it like like late at night on their own
Side
time,
of
right?
desk. Yeah,
Yeah, they can do that, but if they're going to do that, they're not going to do it for you either, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then if they find stuff, right, as well, this is maybe the other thing I'll add, if it's okay. If they
yeah.
find stuff and they go, hey, we could really use this to get around and do this process a lot smarter than we're doing right now,
Right. Yeah.
you gotta trust them and be willing to move away from that ecosystem that you've been used to for the last
Yes.
20 years, right?
Yes.
Don't just go,
Yes.
well, this is the way we've always done it. Because here's the thing: is that the companies that get invited to do keynotes at Salesforce or at Microsoft's, or pick your company, their annual meeting, right? Their annual
Yeah.
convention.
Yeah.
The ones that are up there doing that are the ones where they've actually had, usually at the VP level, I've noticed, a leader
Yeah.
that's like, I want you
Bought
to
into it.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
want you to go and redo things the way. And you brought up, maybe I'll kind of illustrate with this point. You brought up earlier, Tim, something I forgot to mention. When you said that Google and Salesforce and Amazon themselves are actually rethinking the cloud. Here's the
Yes.
thing that I don't think a lot of businesses outside of the tech space realize is that when you're a Google or an Amazon, you started with a blank slate in this world, right?
Yes.
They
Yes.
design all. I've never worked for these organizations. I don't know anyone who has,
No, they do.
frankly,
Yeah.
right? But they got to basically build it from the ground up the way they knew it was going to go, not the way that it
Yes.
always was back in the 1980s or 70s.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, I come from
Yes.
banking. I know that those systems still
Yeah.
exist. So there's a lot. I said I would say this, and Tim, I hope I'm not encroaching on
No,
any
not at
potential
all.
business for you than this, but I would say I could make more than enough money and be very happy consulting for business to say, okay, I'm just going to help you get like change the tracks,
Yeah.
right? You can take
Yeah.
it forward from there, but I just want to
Yeah.
help you for the sake of your staff, even, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
change the
Yeah.
tracks
Yeah.
and get on a
Yeah.
better, more sustainable road,
Yeah.
as far as how your tech stack is looking, because a lot of the implementations I see, I won't mention names again, but I've seen some big name consulting companies that come in and
Yeah.
basically bleed companies dry, writing up Word
Yes.
documents, right,
Yes.
that do
Yeah. And
nothing.
PowerPoints and decks. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. They pick. Yeah. It's ideology and philosophy over like just stone cold like solution delivery, and it's very easy because those companies do get to say they did something, but often it's at the cost of ignoring the people in your company who actually understand your business. And um, I'm fortunate to work in a consultancy where we work alongside our clients often to deliver solutions, and so that's always been really, really important for me because one of the reasons I start my channel is because I know I just realize there's so much value sometimes in a product that I see, maybe fortunately through consulting, like all the value that exists in one thing. So I'm able to articulate it. Maybe that's why the videos help people, because they realize, oh, there's actually another thing I could do with this. And the other thing that's really hard is that change happens all the time. So this release might not have something for you. The next release might not even have something. But then the third release adds something that makes you look back at the previous two and say, actually, I could piece these together to make a new solution. So there is also what I would call like a atomic nature to these updates. They're just sort of incremental, incremental, incremental. You look back 5 years and the Tableau ecosystem is entirely different, purely because of these small incremental changes, to the point now where you've got like Tableau Next, a whole new product built off this sort of innovation. So yeah, no, I couldn't endorse what you're saying more. And that concept of 1 day a week or 1 day a month, I would not only do that, but I would make sure that you have someone in your business whose responsibility it is to be an architect for how these things work. And by architect, I don't mean they have to be a developer. I just mean they have to own the knowledge of how these processes come together, so that if something breaks or if someone leaves, you've already got that heritage of passing that information on within your team and owning that knowledge. Because a lot of the time it ends up being people like me, consultings, who come in, figure it out, fix it, and now we've got all that heritage, but then we leave, and then you're still left with the same problem. So really
And panic
invest in your
ensues.
people. Yeah, exactly. Of course, really invest in your people. Make sure they have the heritage of how your business works. Don't outsource it to someone else. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
And
yeah,
last question, again, I'll let you take, if this is just a quick answer, that's great. If you want to take a little
yeah,
longer, that's fine too, before we
yeah.
do
No
our
worries.
final shout out. Is if someone isn't familiar with it, like they're hearing some of these terms like, oh, this sounds pretty bad, right? This
Yeah,
cloud stuff sounds, I mean, you're following the conversation. Obviously, you're still
yeah,
here with us at the end, but you're maybe not familiar or as familiar as you'd like to be with this
yeah,
space. What recommendation would you give for folks in that boat? Again, small businesses,
yeah,
and so on that are like, hey, where do I start? Because it sounds like, as you said earlier, some of these tools are not really built for the small
yeah,
fellow, small gal in mind.
yeah, yeah.
Where do you start if you want to kind of start leveraging some of the benefits of these tools and these solutions without having to open up a very large checkbook?
Yeah. I firmly believe in a solution led discovery process, because if you say, okay, let's say you heard of AWS and you want to say, hey, what could AWS do for my finance team? Okay, now that's a really big question to ask. Why? Because AWS has something like 1,300 services, and so you're not about to sit there and go through all of AWS and figure things out. Even if you went to, let's say, the AWS homepage, you went to the finance vertical, and then you looked at all the use cases, you honestly wouldn't understand anything on the page, because again, you're lacking all the context around the solution. Instead, what you have to do is you have to say, hey, we have a problem in our business. Let's say a typical one is like credit control, right? So we have a credit control problem. I want to see if AWS can help us fix credit control issues. Okay. And so the number one thing you would do is just map out the credit control process on a white piece of paper, just as you know it in your business today. So you have a database, you have a transaction system, you'll have a processing system, and then you'll have like a BI layer to be able to see it. So three very simple steps. Then you'd go to AWS and say, hey, as a cloud solution, what do you have for transactional databases? Hey, as a service, what do you have for BI intelligence? What do you have for this? And that approach is much more precise and much more sort of razor focused at finding the ways in which the platform can help today. And it focuses your mind on a much smaller problem, which is focusing in on how you can bring value to your business. And what you will find, if you do this time and time again, is you start to build a mental model of generally how the cloud can help your business. So you start with one use case, maybe you go to the next use case. It doesn't mean you have to build them on AWS. You just doing the discovery. Then you start to realize, hey, actually, we haven't gone with AWS the last 2 times, but actually this third solution makes it worthwhile to reconsider how we do everything. Because if I can move this whole entire ecosystem of processes under one roof, it opens up this new capability, and actually the cloud might be a benefit. And that tends to be how cloud innovation actually works. It's not like some CIO decides, right, we're going to the cloud, and off they go. What tends to happen is you have a breakout solution that is really successful, and you have another breakout solution, and then you have 2 breakout solutions, 3, and before you know it, the momentum picks up, and suddenly you're thinking, whoa, before we just start, doing piecemeal sort of innovation here, can we do something more innovative and bigger and more ambitious? And you go back to your business and you say, here's all the ways that we've used this technology so far. Can you think of ways it could change the way we do things, full stop? And that, like you said, people then get to design the solution from the ground up. They design in the direction the business is heading, not in the direction that the software vendors are dictating. And that puts you in a much more powerful conversation when it comes to talking to a vendor, because vendors will say anything is possible in their tools. But when you intimately know the process, you own the heritage of how these solutions work, it's much easier to do that transition and actually understand the jargon, but also bring them back to life. Like you talk to Salesforce, they'll talk to you about, the in terminology of their ecosystem, but you can be very frank with them and say, well, what does that mean to me? I'm a finance professional. This is what I do day to day. You translate it for me. And I think it just puts you in a more powerful step. So that's my biggest advice. Keep things simple, keep grounded in your business. Don't get too sort of pulled into the sector of tech and its sort of hype trains that sort of come and go as well. And once you start to see a bit of momentum towards the cloud, that's a good time to ask yourself, hey, maybe we should think of doing something more ambitious here, because it's starting to make more sense to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I'll just add here that, like, to your point, and this is excellent, what you're saying here, as far as like really having someone who's on your side, whether it's yourself or
Yeah,
someone else in your organization,
yeah,
kind of leading this discussion.
yeah,
Whether you're working for a public company or a privately owned organization, you don't need to take my word for it. There are all these articles on Bloomberg, Market Watch,
yeah,
all these other sites saying, are we too short term in our thinking, because that's just kind of how our cycle goes with quarterly results and so
yeah,
on. Um,
yeah,
and
yeah,
here's the thing, is that if you could convince, and it's a very easy use case, I believe, to make to any CEO, but if you could convince your boss that you know your stock price may take a bit of a hit in the short term, if you're willing to go forego some of those options vesting, right?
yeah,
Because I
yeah,
know that's
yeah,
really what's
yeah.
driving some of this
That's
stuff.
important for some people. Yeah,
Yeah, but if you're willing to forego a few quarters of that, if you redo some of these tools and some of these ecosystems,
hmm,
you're not what's gonna happen, you're gonna step up, right? You're gonna be in
yeah,
another layer altogether, and then imagine what your vestiture will look like at that point, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
And here's the thing, is it's not a you know if it could happen, it's a win. If you're not doing it, someone else eventually will, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It just requires a bit of
yeah,
patience, but I believe that someone out
yeah.
there will eventually catch on to this, because the pain point is already being recognized in the business media.
Correct,
So
correct. Yeah. And your industry will also be industry discussions tend to all talk about the same, what I would call outward facing pain points, but they don't often talk about the solutions they're trying to solve those problems. And so just keeping a pulse on not just what your competitors are doing, but actually generally what the industry is doing, is a really good way of understanding how early or mature is a solution. You look at AI today, and I have to say, like, any company who's deployed an AI solution in the last year might have done it the most expensive way, because AI improves so quickly and gets so cheap, so much cheaper, so much faster, that if you just wait 6 months, the thing that was costing, I don't know, $10 per query 6 months ago now costs about 1 cent per query. And so you have to really think about the timing and the execution. Yes, there's a moment, there's an opportunity, but really the timing can actually be another key factor in the success to adoption, the success of execution, and at least in terms of the context we're talking about, the actual cost itself. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Like, VCRs used to cost $2,000. Right now, you can get
Yeah.
a DVD player for what, $20.
Yeah.
Probably about like 15 pounds. Right.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It there is a cost to being an early adopter. Now, there may be a
Yeah.
business case
Exactly.
for it, but you have to weigh that. So no, that's a great
Correct.
point, Tim.
Correct. Yeah.
But yeah, on that note, I want to thank you so much. This was a fantastic discussion. I've learned a
No, you're
lot.
welcome.
It's been very enriching. And I wanted to give you an opportunity as well, to just kind of give a shout out for your business, your
Yeah.
YouTube page as well. Let us know what
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
all about and who you can help out there who's listening today.
Absolutely, yeah. So we covered at the top. TableauTim. I have a YouTube channel where I cover Tableau and soon other data tools. But my 9 to 5, I'm actually an analytics consultant at Aimpoint Digital. We help companies solve problems in the analytics space, in the data space, and a lot of the things I talked about are things that I've sort of gained from my experience working with clients at Aimpoint. So yeah, come and talk to us if you've got a problem or a challenge, whether it's data, AI, dare I say, and/or strategy as well. So come and get involved.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Tim. And as I'll have in the final version of this, I'm sure you'll already seen the ad for Palmetto Maple that we kind of bridge the finance and the data world. But
Yes.
we rely on folks like Tim to help out as well on the more technical side of things. And then what we really are concerned about is making sure that your data integrity is there and that you don't
Yeah.
have more, blackout Mondays like we had last week here in the States. So,
Yeah, that
but
kept everyone up.
Oh, absolutely. But no, thanks again, Tim. I said it's been a pleasure, and we hope that we can have you on the podcast again soon as things
Absolutely.
continue to
Yeah.
evolve here.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. We might be talking a year's time to see how the pricing model has gone down with customers.
Absolutely. So, well, thanks again,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we'll have another episode out there for folks soon.